Some have called me America's first rebel. Though I disagree after all, because we ought always to obey God rather than men. During my life, many misunderstood my reluctance to baptize those who may not have truly been converted, my refusal to take the Indians' land, and most importantly, my unwillingness to accept the rule of a state church. But like a wise man once said, I braved the sneer of men because I feared the frown of my Lord. I hope the testimony of my life will strengthen your faith in the face of the coming opposition. Armies march because of the adversary, not in spite of them. Growing up in the Church of England, I witnessed its corruption and understood later that when a gap has been opened in the wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world, God hath ever made his garden a wilderness. But even in that wilderness, God can make the flower of faith to bud. I witnessed with my very eyes the persecution laid so terribly against the Puritans by King James I. Discriminated against and loathed by many, these Puritans left England. Years later, I would remember their example when it came time for me to do battle for the Lord. I attended school in Cambridge and received holy orders from the Church of England, but was swiftly alienated because of my conversion to Puritanism. After learning Dutch, I planned to join the famous separatist pilgrims, those who would eventually settle at Plymouth. Even in this desire to join the pilgrims, God's providence was evident. In the future, the colony of Rhode Island would depend upon great champions of human freedom like John Milton, who I tutored in Dutch and became great friends with. But at his will, the Lord set me in another direction, and I was married. Soon after, I was happily employed as a domestic chaplain in the home of one of the great allies of the Puritan leader, Oliver Cromwell. In the company of this man of conviction, how could my faith not be strengthened and my heart not prepared for the trials I would face in just a few short years? This relationship would prove to be providential in my struggle to secure the colony of Rhode Island. It was during this time that I left Puritanism to become a separatist, believing the Church of England to be too corrupt to purify. This decision changed my life and the destiny of the American continent forever. I purposed by God's will to become a missionary to the Indians of the New World, and together with my wife journeyed to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But upon our arrival, the pastorship of the Puritan Boston Church was offered to me. I declined because, although they were nonconformist, they kept the belief that the state, through the church, had the right to punish spiritual sins. Magistrates in the colony controlled the church and punished deviations of personal conviction. This violated the principles of individual soul liberty that I had grown to hold dear. I proclaimed, any church that uses the arm of civil power to enforce its claims is no church of Jesus Christ. Later, I was asked to pastor in Salem, but my religious convictions continued to put me at odds with the magistrates of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I spoke forthrightly against the government's control over religious matters. The authorities believed that religious and civil law were the same, and that they should enforce both. I knew that this was wrong. The colony banished me for my beliefs, but also because I could not abide the theft of Indian land by the Crown. A few months later, an order was made for my arrest and deportation to England, but with God's help, I was able to escape. In the wilderness, I endured an unusually hard winter with several close companions. The Narragansett Bay froze, and I remember thinking after 14 weeks that I had no idea what better bread meant. The following year, despite opposition from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, I founded the town of Providence. Finally, after years of trouble and numerous discouragements, I could see the perfect hand of God ordering events in my life and beyond it. The town of Providence would be a place of freedom, a place where a man would never be commanded to approach God against his beliefs. Governor Winthrop, my good friend, bore witness of our creed when he said, Mr. Williams and the rest did make an order that no man should be molested for his conscience. Shortly thereafter, though we had no meeting house to worship in, I founded the First Baptist Church of Providence. It would later be called the mother of 18,000 churches of like faith and order on the continent of America. Though it was hard, the Lord provided for our aim to found a colony wholly able to be dedicated to the principles of individual soul liberty and freedom of conscience. With the help of my friends John Milton and Oliver Cromwell, I worked with the English Parliament to make Rhode Island a true colony with governing powers and a guarantee of the recognition of humanity's God-given soul liberty. Opposition to the work of God is no new thing. I encourage you, brethren, Christ will ultimately receive all glory and be victorious. Pray for strength to obey him, and know that the power I drew upon exists for you today in the Word of God. You can be sure-footed in a decaying world if you know what you believe and why. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God.